Just a few things to keep in mind as you study for the Chapter 7 test. Again, as I mentioned in the Part 1 recording for the test review, remember how to use the mod operator to check for the remainder of a division problem, and most of the time that will be used to tell if a number is odd or even. You might be trying to go through the elements in an array, and if the value is even, you might do one thing. If the value is odd, you might do something else. Sometimes you'll actually test the index number itself to see if it's odd or even, so that you can do different things with the alternating values. So you can test the actual value in an element of the array, or you can test the index number to see if they're odd or even. You might use that to try to also help you figure out if an array of integers or doubles is sorted in order from smallest to largest, and I'm trying to figure out where's the midpoint, which value is the exact middle, which index number holds the mid value. You might use the mod operator to do that. Also, remember, you cannot use a negative number for an index, like mystery bracket -1 bracket. That will give you an index array out of bounds error, just as if you had an index that held 10 numbers and you tried to do bracket 10 bracket or bracket 11 bracket, when we know the indexes go from 0 to 9. If you see the word ascending or the words ascending order, we're talking about going from smallest to largest, like counting 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's ascending. Descending, of course, is going from largest to smallest, like counting backwards, like 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, that's descending. So be aware, you'll see that those terms on the AP exam as well as on the test. Also remember, size paren goes with an array list, and length with no parens goes with an array. They both give you the same information, the total number of elements, but with an array list it's .size paren, with an array it's .length. Remember that the wrapper classes are used with array list because they convert numbers or Boolean values into objects, and an array list has to store objects. So if you want to put the number 1 or the value true into it, you have to use these wrapper classes because those convert the primitive values into objects, which can then be stored in an array list, whereas an array uses the primitives. And notice that the wrapper classes are all starting with capital letters, and the word integer is spelled out in the wrapper class, whereas the primitives start with lowercase and integer is int. Strings can go with either one, array or array list, because a string is really an object. An array will take it and an array list will take it as well. Remember the weird array list declaration format? Remember, you have to do an import, but then you do array list, data type here, which would be string or integer, double or Boolean, name equals new, then you do array list again, you do the data type again, then you do the 2 parens and a semicolon. If you really knew that you wanted 3 items, you can stick the 3 in there. So you can put a number in there if you know exactly how many items you want, but most of the time you just do that and you do, xyz.add to add things to it. If you have to choose between using an array and an array list, and you're dealing with a large list of primitive values like ints or doubles, go with an array. It is more efficient for large lists of primitive values like that. So that's my advice on array versus array list. If you have a small list of values and you don't mind converting from int to integer, for example, an array list is fine. If you're going to do, say you want to do an array list of bank accounts, that's perfectly valid, or rectangles. If you do your rectangle import, that's perfectly valid. And so if you have a large list of those types of things, you might want to use an array list as well. So, but when you have a large list of primitive values, I've got a million numbers I want to add up and they're all integers, an array is better suited for that. An array list is better suited for storing objects, whether it's strings, rectangles, or small lists of integers, doubles, booleans. Also remember, an array list can only ever be one-dimensional, but an array can be two-dimensional. And remember that the index numbers, when we're dealing with arrays and array lists even, the index numbers go from 0 to length minus 1. But when we want to know the total number of items in the array, we use the length or the size. With an array list, we would go from 0 to size minus 1. Okay, but the idea being that if you have 100 items total count of 100 items in an array or an array list, the index is going to go from 0 to 99, which is length minus 1. So those are all the things that I can think of to tell you. Also remember the differences between array and array list. Array is more or less fixed length. Array list is dynamic. Array list can only be one-dimensional. Array can be one or two-dimensional. Array lists can only use those wrapper classes because they take objects like string, int, boolean, double. Array can use string, but it can use the primitives int, boolean, or double, the lowercase versions of that. So those are some of the differences between arrays and array lists. An array list uses the size paren to get the count. An array uses length. Hopefully this will give you a general idea of what to expect on the test. You also need to remember we will be doing more with arrays going forward. And array lists. This is just the tip of the iceberg here. We're going to find out a few more complex ways to use these things. We're going to do a little more with the auto boxing. Down the road we're going to learn how to clone or copy an array, and we're still going to be dealing with arrays and array lists as we go forward, and you're going to see them again and again and again on each test going forward. So this is just arrays and array lists light to get you started. So you can't just do a brain dump after this test. You're going to have to remember this, and you're going to learn some other ways, some other important facts rather, about arrays and array lists. I did want to show you one more thing about array lists in preparation for the test. We've set up some array lists, we've manipulated them a little bit, but I wanted to just show you a couple of things. Here I've created an array list and I've added everything to it, and I'm using the for each loop here because it's just quick and easy for me to print everything out. And so I've added these four Rudolphs, Olive, the other reindeer, Rudolph, Hermie, and Bumble, these four reindeer. Well, Hermie and Bumble aren't. They're sort of like honorary reindeer here in effect. Okay, so I've added these names to my list, and when I print them out, they're nice, they're in order. Now remember, with add, you can tell it go to index number such and such and add this value. So what's going to happen here, I've got Olive as my first element, which has an index of 0, but in my very next line I'm going to say now add Rudolph, but put Rudolph first, okay, and then add Hermie and Bumble. What happens to Olive? Does Olive go away? Does Olive get bumped down under Rudolph? And that's exactly what happens. When I say go put Rudolph as the first element, it bumps Olive down. It doesn't delete Olive, it doesn't overwrite Olive, it does not replace Olive. All that happens was Olive was first and now she's second, okay? So if I do that, and then for example I add Hermie, and what if I come down and I remove the first person? Now I should be back to Olive, Hermie, and Bumble, which I am. Or what if I say remove the second person? And of course I'm redoing this every time I run, okay? Now this is where it gets tricky, and you might be asked to do things like this on the AP exam or the test. Olive is first. Oh, look, now I put Rudolph first, Olive is second. then Hermie and Bumble. Then I said remove the second element, so that removed Olive. So you may want to have a scratch piece of paper so you can write out, okay, Olive, oh, let me put Rudolph above Olive, now let me put Hermie and Bumble. Okay, now it says remove one, oh, that's Olive, so now I'd be left with Rudolph, Hermie, and Bumble. So you need to be able to have scratch paper or some way that you can kind of write out the way that it is, and then when you start doing removes, you can just go scratch that off and you can see how the array list changes. So be aware that you'll need to do things like that on the exam.